Divorce lawyers. What is the most insane way a spouse has tried to screw the other? My Uncle Dave's divorce from Aunt Linda was supposed to be straightforward. They'd been married for 26 years, had 2 kids who were both adults living on their own, and honestly seemed to hate each other enough that splitting up should have been a relief for everyone involved. Dave owned a successful accounting firm, Linda worked part-time at a dental office, and they had the kind of middle-class assets that usually get divided up without too much drama. That was before Linda's lawyer apparently convinced her that she was entitled to everything Dave might possibly inherit for the rest of his natural life. The whole thing started falling apart during mediation, when Linda's attorney, some slick guy named Patterson, who wore suits that cost more than most people's rent, started asking about Dave's family assets, specifically what my grandmother Margaret might leave Dave when she passed away. My grandmother was 84 at the time, sharp as a tack, and had been managing her own finances since my grandfather died 15 years earlier. She owned her house outright, had a decent retirement account, and some savings bonds she'd been collecting since the Kennedy administration. Nothing crazy, but enough that it mattered. Mrs. Linda is entitled to half of any inheritance Mr. Dave receives during their marriage, or that he might reasonably expect to receive, Patterson announced, like he was revealing some brilliant legal loophole. Dave's lawyer, Jim Morrison, not the rock star, just a guy who happened to share the name, looked at Patterson like he'd suggested dividing up Dave's future lottery winnings. That's not how inheritance law works, he said. Inherited assets are typically separate property, unless they've been commingled. But Patterson wasn't done. He had Linda sign an affidavit claiming that she'd contributed to maintaining my grandmother's house over the years, that she'd provided emotional support and care that increased the value of the family relationship, and that she deserved compensation for her role in preserving the inheritance that Dave would eventually receive. The really insane part was that Linda had barely spoken to my grandmother in the last 5 years. They'd never gotten along, and after a particularly brutal Thanksgiving dinner in 2018, where Linda made some comments about my grandmother's outdated political views, family gatherings had been awkward at best. Dave tried explaining to Linda that he honestly had no idea what my grandmother's will looked like, and that she might leave everything to charity for all he knew. Linda's response was that Dave needed to find out immediately what his expected inheritance portion would be, so they could factor it into the divorce settlement. The absolute peak of the insanity came when Patterson filed a motion requesting that Linda be granted joint custody of Dave and Linda's children. Not visitation, not shared decision-making for grandchildren that didn't exist yet, full joint custody of 23-year-old Ryan and 25-year-old Sarah. Both kids had been living independently for years. Ryan was married and working as a software engineer in Portland. Sarah had just finished grad school and was starting her career as a physical therapist in Denver. Neither of them lived within 500 miles of their parents, and both had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with the divorce drama. When Jim Morrison received the custody motion, he called Dave laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Dave, I've been practicing family law for 30 years and I have never seen anyone request custody of adults. I don't even know what form to file to respond to this." The judge, when she finally saw the paperwork, asked Patterson 3 times if he was serious. He was. He argued that Linda deserved continued parental authority over the children she'd raised, and that Dave might try to alienate their adult children against her during the divorce proceedings. Ryan and Sarah both had to submit notarized statements to the court, explaining that they were adults who made their own decisions and didn't need either parent to have custody of them. Sarah's statement was particularly brutal. "I am 25 years old, have a master's degree, pay my own bills, and am not a piece of property to be divided up in my parents' divorce." The inheritance scheme fell apart completely when my grandmother decided to update her will. She'd been following the divorce proceedings with interest, and Linda's attempts to claim future inheritance rights had apparently annoyed her enough to take action. Instead of leaving her assets to her children as everyone expected, she revised everything to go directly to me and my brother when she passed away. My grandmother didn't tell anyone about the change until the divorce was finalized. Then she invited the whole family over for Sunday dinner and announced it casually over pot roast. "I decided to skip a generation," she said. "Dave and Margaret are doing fine for themselves. The kids can use it more. Dave got the house, his business, and most of their shared assets. Linda got half the retirement accounts and alimony for 3 years. The custody motion was dismissed with prejudice, which means she can never file it again." Patterson probably made a fortune in legal fees convincing Linda to pursue the most ridiculous divorce strategy in family court history. Linda moved to Florida 6 months later. Ryan and Sarah still call Dave regularly and visit for holidays. My grandmother lived another 4 years and left me and my brother enough money to pay off our student loans and put down payments on our first houses. Sometimes the universe has a sense of justice.